Jesus told us that these things would happen, and folks, when it does happen, it's going to happen rapidly. We need to get right with him now or face eternal judgment. So what's the traditional teaching about the fig tree? Everybody says it. The fig tree is Israel. And the moment you begin to see Israel being reestablished, that generation will see the rapture of the church and the second coming. Hogwash. It doesn't say that. It never did say that. Sorry, I don't mean to sound offensive. I don't mean to, bother people or upset people. That's not what Jesus is saying here. Now, is the reestablishment of the nation of Israel a mega sign? You bet it is. Is the reestablishment of the nation of Israel something significant that we should all be paying attention to? Absolutely. Is it something that should tell us we are definitely approaching or in the last day? Undoubtedly. But to say that it's going to be that generation is a hogwash conclusion. And if you really believe it and you're teaching it, then you just made God a liar. Because it's been 75 years since the nation of Israel is reestablished. And if that means that that generation will see the second coming of Christ, well, then we've already broken every single rule. Because even by the most liberal interpretation, a generation is 80 years, which would mean the rapture of the church should have taken place 2 years ago. Right? You understand the errors that are being made here? This is not what Jesus is saying. Look what he says. Very important. And by the way, if you choose to reject the sensationalistic approach that is oftentimes associated with the assertion that the fig tree is what it is, you will actually develop within your mind and heart a better appreciation for the day in which we live. You will better understand it because it becomes so much more significant. Look at what is said here in verse 32. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. He's not saying now learn a simile of a fig tree, right? He's saying learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise you, when you shall see all things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Wow. What did he just tell us? He said, think about it, guys. Most of these people have farming backgrounds. Most of these people understand illustrations that come from nature. And he's telling the people, look, you walk down the way and you begin to see fig trees that are now blossoming and the fruit is beginning to show. It's a leading indicator of what fact? You're in the summer, right? It's not like you had iPhones back then. It's not like you had some weird, calendar that you can walk around with. Scrolls were bigger than most people could even imagine. You didn't have some hashtag reference tool that you used to be able to determine what day you were in or what hour you were in. They had some sophisticated ways of being able to do this, but you knew something very important. If you were walking down any ground or road and you saw a fig tree that had nothing, just branches, you knew, we're in the winter, obviously. You're not going to see any fruit coming out of these things. But you begin to start walking down and you see these fig trees that now have fruit beginning to be bared from them. You see them blossoming. You begin to see the leaves forming. You realize something very quickly. We're in the summer. And nothing can be more beautiful than to see what happens in the spring when everything begins to blossom, and you approach the summer when you get to enjoy the fruit of all of that. I was in the grocery store. I'm in the produce section and I find myself getting mad. Now, why am I getting mad? Well, because we're about to grill some hamburgers and I want fresh corn on the cob. When you go through that produce section, it's not there. They have that just, no offense to the Jolly Green Giant, but come on, corn in a bag isn't corn, all right? And when you start looking around and you begin to see the corn on the cob, that's like, you can tell it's been like darn near freeze dried and it's in the packages, and you open it and you don't know the difference between the corn and the paper it's sitting on, it's like, gosh, this is depressing, right? It's frustrating. You're like, man, what in the world is going on? This is a first world problem, okay? I just want you to know that. I'm complaining like a spoiled brat here, okay? I just want you to know that for the record, okay? I was in the grocery store the other day because I had to return some food that spoiled. Here's the funny thing about that. I go through the produce section again, and I notice that ears of corn are in the produce section. And man, I'm telling you, it's got the husks and everything everything. And I'm like, yes. And this nostalgic feeling comes over me, right? And I begin to realize something. We're getting close. We're getting close to summer, all of that stuff. We get to whip out the George Foreman grill, make burgers every day. This is it. The season is here, right? This is a great time. I love this time of the year. And you begin to realize there are leading indicators, right? Or how about this? I don't know about you. This is very nostalgic for me. But how about when you start driving down the street as you get closer to the 4th of July and you begin to see the fireworks stands come up in the part, you might not even buy fireworks, but doesn't it make you feel good? Like you're like, wow, it's that season. This is so cool, right? Or in my neighborhood, and yes, there are neighborhoods like this in California. When you drive down the street in my neighborhood, you see American flags everywhere. You see neighbors coordinate with one another and line the street sides with American flags. There are people that still say, I love the USA. But it's just really, really funny how you just see those things and it just feels so good on the inside, doesn't it? Right? Like I come to church and I get ready to teach the word and I see people wearing attire that is red, white, and blue. American flags sometimes. You just think, we're there. We're at the season. It's a leading indicator. You see the fig tree. Jesus is saying this. When you see the fig tree, just like the fig tree blossoming is an indicator of the season you are in, when you see the signs that I've talked about, you are going to know that the time is near. Look for, just like you look at the figs on the fig tree, look at the signs that I've given you. You know the time is near. And then Jesus goes on to make this statement. He says, very important, he says, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. In other words, Jesus is saying, I'm serious. I'm serious. Funny thing is, you're going to see the signs. You know the first sign that God gives us that tells us this will be the fig tree generation, right? The fig tree generation. People call us the fig tree generation. That may or may not be true. I cannot say for sure that we are the fig tree generation. That would be a false assertion to make because we do not see the sign that Jesus gives us that tells us you are the fig tree generation. What's that sign? It's a sign that we won't see here on earth because we'll be raptured before it comes. But for those that are still here on this earth, they'll see that sign, but unfortunately, they'll probably be brainwashed by it. The sign that Jesus gives us is that which is spoken of in Revelation 13 and Daniel chapter 9. And that sign is the abomination that causes desolate. We spoke about that last week, right? The sign is when the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple and demands to be worshiped. Now, why is this important? Okay, think about this for a second, right? It's that generation that will see the second coming. That's pretty cool, right? But knowing these facts for us is important because many people say, we're going to be raptured anyway. Why does this even matter? Well, think about it. If the Bible tells us that the Antichrist is going to involve himself in matters regarding Israel and there is no nation of Israel, when Israel becomes a nation, don't you think that gets us one step closer to the end times? Okay, now let's take this a step further. When Israel becomes a nation but yet does not have possession of the Temple Mount, or Jerusalem for that matter, especially East Jerusalem, and a war takes place in the 60s where they now possess control over Jerusalem, you think we're getting one step closer? Or how about we hear the Antichrist will set himself up in the temple? That's the temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and demand to be worshiped. And now we're beginning to hear people in the Knesset talk about taking control away from the Waqf, back to the Temple Mount, giving it back to Israel, and Israel now looking at the idea of building a temple on top of the location where the Dome of the Rock is built. Can you would officials even be allowed to get away with using such terminology 5 years ago? No. They're about to build a temple, folks. I don't know how soon that's happening, but it's going to happen. These are all leading indicators that things are about to happen that we know are going to happen in the tribulation, which means we're getting much closer to the rapture, right? Now, we're clearly not going to know the day or the hour. But the first sign that we are given concerning when the second coming will take place is the abomination that causes desolate. Now, this is very important to understand, because look what Jesus goes on to say about this. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not angels of heaven, but my Father only. Now, this is a very interesting thing that Jesus says, because he makes something very clear that might not be clear to a lot of people. People oftentimes say that when Jesus said no one will know the day or the hour, it's talking about the rapture. It's not. Jesus is talking about the second coming. But the reason why people oftentimes say it's talking about the rapture and not the second coming is because theoretically, if you study Bible prophecy and you know it well, then you would know the day and the hour when the second coming would take place, because the Bible tells us that a 7-year time clock starts the very moment Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 takes place, where the Antichrist basically makes strong a peace treaty. That's when the time clock starts. And then if you're unsure when that time clock did start, then you know you could start a new time clock for 3.5 years, because at the 3.5 year mark, the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple and demands to be worshiped. And immediately at that point, you know you can count down 3.5 years and the second coming takes place. Except for one major problem. Do any of you guys know the fact that when the Abraham Accords were actually agreed upon, they were agreed upon almost a year before it was made publicly known that any accord would happen? Almost a year before any public signing took place? Don't ask me how I know that. Please don't ask me how I know that. Right? Did you know that almost every treaty we have ever seen in world history had an inception and a solidification of that treaty long before it was published to anybody? So here's the question you have to ask. When does the 7-year time clock start? The world might hear the announcement that the treaty was established on this day, but when was it really established? Was it established in a restaurant between two world leaders that actually signed a little document on a piece of paper? We don't know. So you're never going to know the day or the hour, because you're never going to know the day or the hour of when that actually happened. And even you might be able to argue that the Bible says, well, no one will know the day or the hour, but how about those that actually signed the peace treaty or made the agreement? They would know the day or the hour. Well, I suppose they would if they were actually interested in the things of God. You guys get it? Even Satan himself isn't going to understand it. He's not going to know the timeline. And then here's another question. When the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple and demands to be worshiped, is that going to be from the moment he actually does that? I think yes. But when is the world going to find out about that? Who knows if the Antichrist just walked into the temple on his own in the name of doing an act of worship and sits in that temple and makes a determination in his heart at that moment, all will worship me in here. And that started the time clock. No one will have known about that. So to say that no one will know the day or the hour is an incredibly accurate and correct statement, because no one will know the day or the hour. That's why when you have people that make predictions about when things like this are going to come, run from them. They're liars. Okay? They are not telling you the truth. They're wrong. No one's going to know. Nobody is going to know. I think it's important that we understand that.